Christian background or Hermetic or Platonic, whatever, you may see this as the one or God, or it may be many deities, whatever. When the stars and planets align perfectly, it creates a gateway to the divine realm. And this creates a gateway where you can communicate or interact with beings in the other realm. So to put all this together in the three world system, you have the material world, the elementary. These are, you have lunar incense, lunar metals, lunar colors, lunar incense, all these things. The elementary realm is of the moon or whatever planet you're working with. Astrologically, you have the correct timing because you're wanting the planets to align to create a gateway to the next level up, which is the realm of spirits, archangels, deities, things like that. So that is the three-tiered system. And these are the three components of the machine that together run, and they make a technology. So this is how magic works. So I'm going to bring this back to Theophilos. So that's just a basic breakdown.
All right, so I do want to make a note here. We are going over a general basis. When you read so many grimoires, especially in the Key of Solomon, when you go through the Picatrix, when you go through Agrippa, and so many other sources, you're going to find that not every grimoire has the same correspondences. Keep that in mind. That's so important to remember. And once again, this is our word, and we only go by certain sources. The sources that we're primarily using here are the Picatrix, the 3 books of occult philosophy, Christian Astrology by William Lilly, William Ramsey, Al-Kindi, Al-Biruni, the Ashmole manuscript 396, then the Secrets of High Magic from Christopher Warnock, the Mansions of the Moon from Christopher Warnock. So, and there's so much more literature out there.
Secrets of Planetary Magic by Christopher Warnock, you mean?
Yeah, pretty much. So, the Secrets of Planetary Magic is a good source for beginners, I would say, especially if you're going to work with any of this. I think that that's a great starting point personally. So I want to get that out of the way. This is the primary source literature that we're going with. Now, I want to start with a more versatile system that's where you don't necessarily have to time everything. But keep in mind that some of these spirits, I would still use protection, like with a circle or some sort of blessed item you can make, or anything that'll keep away some of the spirits. And it's not to scare anybody, but we're going to be going into the first mansions of the moon. Actually, the first spirit is used to help murder someone. But keep in mind, these mansions.
Yeah, that is like in the Picatrix. It's like opening up to the spirits and how to work with the spirits of the lunar mansions. And it's like the first lunar mansion, here's how you get a spirit to murder someone. And that's like the first, that is the first spell for working with a spirit from the Picatrix. So I cannot stress this enough. These spirits are not necessarily your friend. These are not, you have to be careful working with these entities. Any entities, use protection, people, use protection. And I just want to clarify what you said. You said that it's not so much based on timing. Mansions of the moon, you're not dealing so much with, is the moon in an exalted or domicile, or is it in detriment or fall, or is it in its trine? You're not dealing so much with essential dignities with the lunar mansions, because the entire zodiac, the entire range is used. That's what you meant, right? When it comes to, and you're not so much focusing on all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot more loose. I mean, because there are 3 distinct systems in lunar magic that we have to keep in mind. Now, a lot of times, especially in some of the Key of Solomon, and just to add context to this, most of the magic is done during a waxing moon. And that's very important. All right?
Yeah, so the Key of Solomon, it mentions the lunar mansions. And it also mentions trines and sextiles and being free of the infortunes and stuff like that. But one of the most fundamental things in the Key of Solomon is that spells to bring in prosperity, good luck, things like that, or new love is during a waxing moon or growing moon. And basically curses and destruction, and also dealing with the dead and, getting rid of things are done during the waning moon. So we see that lunar cycle, but we also see phases, in all this literature, astrology. I've never seen a grimoire where it just, all of these things, kind of go together. But the lunar mansions themselves, they could either be inserted or taken out. Not everyone looks at the lunar mansions.
Yeah, so we have three, and I agree with you. We have three different distinct systems here that can be applied together. The mansion system, the phase system, and the actual astrological mansion. Now you're going to find some astro mages who want to combine all three systems together. And then, like for example, the common theme today for modern practitioners is just to follow a phase. And then you have more of the classical view to where we go really deep, like politicians, into the astrology of all of this. And we need to bear that in mind. So once again, you can combine two, you can combine three, you can keep one. And Christopher Warnock does a wonderful job especially in the secrets of planetary magic, and how you can keep this simple, and even how you can make it use a more advanced method. So bear that in mind too. One thing I should point out is if you do want to get an astrological course, I'll do a plug here, and it's not a sponsor. Check out Christopher Warnock's astrological magic course. It's very good, especially for those of you who want to learn this electional magic. So keep in mind, when we're talking about electional magic, we're talking about magic with specific timing for certain purposes. And that's the primary thing that we're focusing on. We're not going over the natal aspects. We're not going over horary astrology. We are sticking with electional astrology, or especially with the moon. So I'll kind of go into the mansions of the moon. At least in the Picatrix, there are 28 mansions. And once again, I've seen 27 mansions in other places, but we're going to stick with the standard 28. And what's interesting about the 28 mansions of the moon is this shows where the moon is like that chameleon, how the chameleon can change colors. Now, for example, we asked a question, why is the first mansion of the moon associated with the spirit of murder? This is because it's in Aries. That's why. So, for example, if it gets into Libra, if it gets into any other mansion, you're going to find different qualities, like this is good for buying cattle. This is good for breaking someone out of prison. This is good for travel by land. This is good for travel by sea. Every mansion is going to have its ups and its downs. You're going to find mansions that are good for commerce, mansions that are good for gain, mansions that are good for loss, mansions that are good for victory over an enemy, and even mansions that are good for gambling too. So you have to bear that in mind when you are working with the mansions. So that's a little more short and sweet. Just look into the book, the Picatrix. Even Agrippa goes a little bit into it. And if you do get the Mansions of the Moon by Christopher Warnock, that's probably the best Mansions of the Moon book I've ever seen anywhere else. Actually, I think it's one of the few I've seen to actually have them in there.
Yeah, and if you really want to get into some practical spells with the lunar mansions, the Picatrix Book 4, Chapter 9, and there's Christopher Warnock has a version, and then also Dan Trell, whom we interviewed. We interviewed Dan Trell. He has his own translation from the Latin. So both are very good. Anyways, yeah, the Picatrix, it's a Book 4, Chapter 9, gives a lot of, different spells that you can do. For example, the second mansion is called Albutine and is for the removal of anger. So basically, if you're having, if there's someone that's angry at you and you want to reconcile, It says when the moon is passing through this mansion, take white wax, and I would do white beeswax because that's more traditional in what they had, and mastic and melt them together over a fire. Then remove this from the fire and make the form of a crowned king. So basically, you're melting white wax and mastic. And by the way, mastic I think was one of the incenses associated with the moon. So, anyways, you make this into a crowned king, and then you suffumigate with lignum aloes. Now, lignum aloes is agarwood or aloes, not aloe vera. It's agarwood, and that goes into the Key of Solomon. The Key of Solomon suggests that aloes is an incense of the moon. So here we have mastic and aloes, and these are two things in other places we see as an incense of the moon. So basically, you make the crowned king, suffumigate with the lignum aloes, and then you call on the spirit or the genie or whatever, the spirit of this lunar mansion, and you ask him to remove anger from this person, okay? Let's see, there's the sixth mansion is called Achaya and is for the putting love between two people. When the moon is passing through this mansion, make 2 images from white wax. Again, I would use beeswax. Basically, you make an image of the couple. So 2 images, make them embrace each other and wrap them in white silk. Suffumigate them with amber and lignum aloes. And again, amber is basically petrified sap. And yes, you can use it as an incense. You grind it up and use it as an incense. And again, lignum aloes is associated with the moon, which is not aloe vera. I keep repeating this because it's important. They're 2 different herbs or 2 different plants, or not, it's a wood. Sorry, it's not a plant. And then basically you suffumigate the 2 figures wrapped together and you call on the spirit to bring love between 2 people. So this looks a lot like, your regular folk magic, except you're dealing with spirits. And here's one thing that I see. It combines, basically you have the astrological timing. That's the 2nd level of the tier. And you have your ingredients. Specifically, you're using white wax. White is the color associated with the moon. Mastic. And basically, you're burning incense of lignum aloes associated with the moon. So basically you have your elementary realm, the object that you're manipulating in a ritual, the timing, and you're contacting a spirit. So that's the last level up, the archetypal or divine realm. So you're combining these. So how do you break this down into a ritual? Basically, you get the correspondences of the planet you're working with, the incenses of Mars or Venus or whatever you're working with. If you're making a talisman, you need to use the metal. Or if you're just going to use parchment, at least use the color ink associated with the planet. And basically use correspondences to create a fit receptacle. You're creating basically a cup, a receptacle, to pull down and attract those forces. So it was actually Proclus. So these ideas go back way before Cornelius Agrippa in the 16th century. These ideas go even way before the Picatrix of the 10th or 11th century. We see this in Proclus, who was a 5th century Neoplatonist. He said that the ray which and this is from Proclus's on sacrifices and magic. So this is a Neoplatonist. Proclus in the 5th century, he said that the ray which crystallizes as Apollo on the level of Platonic ideas will bring forth the sun soul on the next level, the physical sun on the material, the king on the human, the lion on the animal, heliotrope on the vegetative, gold in the mineral level, and unquote. So we see even in we see even in Proclus in the 5th century, he talks about how this stone, this plant, this color is basically a crystallization and a materialization of the force that we see astrologically, and beyond the planet. That's really a gateway. So you're not just worshiping the moon or working with the moon or whatever. You're working with the moon as a gateway. The physical moon is just a gateway to the divine realm. Okay. So yeah. So basically you have the different levels in the system. And of course we see the same ideas repeated in the Asclepius, which was a Hermetic treatise. We see some of these ideas in Plotinus and his Enneads. And so yeah, this concept goes back to late antiquity, at least. And actually you see this in many systems where specific plants and smells and colors are associated with deities, except here we have the astrological realm as an intermediary between the divine. So this is a fundamental aspect of the technology of ritual and magic and working with entities, is the basically correspondence. So yeah, and I think that we should. Okay, so lunar mansions, you don't have to take into account essential dignities. Okay, if you're working with lunar mansions, but if you're not working with lunar mansions and you're working with the moon itself, then you would want to take into account essential dignities. And essential dignities are essential dignities and abilities are the domicile, detriment, exaltation, fall, triplicities, terms, and decans or faces. But we're going to break this down and simplify it. We're mostly going to focus on domicile, exaltation, and triplicity. And then we'll go into a little bit on the houses, things like that. So do you want to open this up talking about exaltation and or rulership and things like that?
Yeah, that's fine. Like I said, first, before we even get into that, we should talk about the phases just really quickly, then we'll kind of go into it. The first and most basic thing that
I agree with that. Yeah.
most people do apply are the phases. Now, when we look at the waxing and waning, and it's almost continuous, there's no end to it. So if you're going to be working with the waxing and waning moon, you better be sure that you want to lose it continuously. Like there's no end. It keeps going and going and going. But if you're going to work with
It's
the
like
new
it's like the serpent with its tail in its mouth. It's a continuous cycle. Its end is in its beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a lot to go into. We've got phases. We have the head and tail of the dragon, north and south nodes of the moon, essential dignities. We already did lunar mansions. So yeah, I agree that we ought to go into the phases. So when the moon is growing, you're bringing things in basically.
Yes.
When the moon is getting smaller, that's when you get rid of things. So yeah.
Yep. So we need to keep a basic concept in here. One being continuous, and another being something coming to an end completely. So something can deteriorate to an end, which would be the new moon, or something can grow to an end, which would be the full moon. Or if you want something to continuously grow, you would use the waxing moon. Or if you would want to continuously lose something, you would use the waning moon. I thought I should get that out of the way first and foremost. Even though it's a basic idea, I think we kind of go over, I don't know, it's easy to look over in a lot of ways. So
yeah, I agree. And so yeah, and then first we have the lunar phases. When the moon is growing, you're bringing in. When the moon is getting smaller, you're getting rid of or destroying. So you have creation and destruction. And there's some ambiguity or some differences on what the new moon and full moon are. In some systems, the new moon is for new beginnings and the full moon is for destruction. We see this in the Rabbi Solomon version of the Key of Solomon, which is unusual, okay? And in some systems, the full moon is like the ultimate bringing in new beginnings, and the new moon is like destruction and death. And I could be wrong because I'm going from memory. I don't have the text in front of me. It seems like the True Black Magic of published by Joseph H. Peterson. Another version of the Key of Solomon has that. But basically, when the moon is growing, you're bringing in. When the moon is going away, you're getting rid of. And I personally, I use the full moon is like really bringing in things. And the new moon is ultimate destruction. But there are differences on that. The next thing to consider is, I would say, the houses. We have different places on the horizon. And the Picatrix actually says that the ascendant is the enemy of the moon. And this is something unusual, because usually when you're doing astrological magic, you want something on the ascendant and the midheaven. But with the moon, the ascendant, according to the Picatrix, is the enemy of the moon. And I've heard other magicians have had trouble with this. We're in Stellar Sorcery, is an excellent Facebook group, and Clifford, he's really knowledgeable. I have a lot of mad respect for the guy. I think we need to get him on the show eventually. That guy really knows his shit. But
oh yeah, and I'm sure we will soon.
Yeah, he was getting into this, how the moon on the ascendant could cause problems. So you try to do the midheaven or the fourth house, which is essentially associated with Cancer, right?
Yeah, very much so. And so when we look at houses, it's really important. There's two ways of doing this in astrology. When we look into the house system, the first way that we look at is by the 10th house or the first house. So that's generally where you would place most planets, actually. So keep in mind the moon is a little bit different in this regard. But also keep in mind that outside of the ascendant and outside of the midheaven, we also have another aspect of this. For example, you would want something like Venus and Libra in the 7th house, and you want to make sure the moon is free from the ascendant, and you would probably want it in the midheaven or the 4th house, somewhere to where it's stronger, or just clear out of Saturn or Mars.
Yeah, and that's unusual because usually the 7th house is not seen as a very good sign, but in this case, the 7th house is associated with Libra. So the 12 houses are not the zodiac, but each one is associated with the zodiac. So you're putting it in its own house, which gives it strength. So the moon rules Cancer, you put it in the 4th house. Venus rules Libra, put it in the 7th house. So yeah, normally we try to avoid cadent houses, but like if the moon is in the 12th house, I mean, not the moon, because we don't do that with the moon. Other planets, you try to get it on the ascendant. It's okay to be in the 12th house or in a cadent house if you're within like 8 degrees of the ascendant or midheaven. So when it comes to getting into, the ascendant or the midheaven with these planets or whatever, there's like basically if you're within like 8 degrees or whatever, then that's ideal. But like with the moon, we try to get the 4th house, which is Cancer, basically associated with Cancer, or in the midheaven. I think the midheaven is really ideal. So the next thing to consider.
But we should also keep in mind, like I said, that these are two different forms of astrological magic too. Now, I mean, they're the same thing, but the house system is just slightly different. This is what
it all goes together as part of a puzzle. Like you can say that aspects in the zodiac are different, but they're all part of the same, puzzle, basically.
Yeah.
But the next thing to consider is rulership. Now, again, if you're dealing with lunar mansions, it doesn't matter. The whole range of the zodiac is usable as lunar mansions. But when you're not doing lunar mansions, you're just trying to deal with the moon specifically, just trying to make a lunar talisman. You want to try to get the moon in Cancer, which the moon rules Cancer. If you can't get it in Cancer, which is its rulership, the ancients actually added mathematical points to try to make this scientific. So if a planet is in its rulership, it's 5 points of essential dignity. So if the moon is in Cancer, that's really perfect. That's ideal. If the moon is on the opposite side of the zodiac in Capricorn, that is bad. That is its detriment. That is -5 points. That is a point of debility. So if the moon is in Cancer, that's a great time. The moon in Capricorn, really bad. Unless, here's the caveat, unless you're dealing with lunar mansions. If you're dealing with lunar mansions, forget that. But otherwise, Capricorn is generally bad. Unless you're trying to do curses and destructive magic, then you may actually want to bring in affliction and debility. But generally, for the good stuff, you want the moon in Cancer. If you can't get Cancer, you get its exaltation, which is Taurus. So exaltations get 4 points of essential dignity. The opposite side of the wheel, its fall, which would be Scorpio, is 4 points of essential debility. So unless you're dealing with lunar mansions, the moon in Scorpio is bad. So try to get the moon in Cancer or Taurus. Now, the moon also rules triplicities. It rules earth signs. You're probably going to want to do a lunar spell at night because it's a nocturnal planet. You're probably going to want to do lunar magic at night. So at night, the moon rules earth signs. So any earth sign, whether it be Taurus, I would not do Capricorn because it's actually its detriment. So Taurus or Virgo, it gets 3 points of essential dignity. And since Taurus is also its exaltation, it gets 4 points for exaltation plus 3 for triplicity. So that's 7 points of essential dignity. So the moon in Taurus is like perfect for doing lunar magic. And I don't really see the point to go into terms and decans. So basically, if you're looking at essential dignities, try to get the moon in Cancer or Taurus. Or Virgo if you can, and try to avoid Capricorn and Scorpio. And that is just dealing with essential dignities. I don't really think we need to get into terms and faces or decans and all that, but that is the essential dignities. And I just made a video on astrological timing. So the video I posted on my channel before this one, I go deeply into astrological timing. So that is trying to get the moon in Cancer, Taurus, or Virgo and avoid its detriment and fall. And that is just like basic essential dignity. And then we've got to consider beyond that, basically aspects.
Yeah, so these aspects are very important. Most generally, unless you would like to pull off a curse or do something very negative, then you would generally avoid Mars, because Mars will bring something within conflict. You have to remember that the moon has the largest orb, which is, if I remember, it's at 9 degrees. So this is really important. So let's say that the moon is clear, but at the same time, that moon has Mars in it within less than 9 degrees. It's going to pull in the energy from those other planets which are less than 9 degrees. So there's a few rules we have to look at here. And remember, the moon has to be 8.5 degrees away from the sun. And this is because the sun has such an immense energy, it nullifies the planets around it. This is called combustion. This means that planet is rendered with its power to nothing. So, although, once again, in the Picatrix, there are two different systems on this. At 1 minute, the Picatrix says that the sun and moon at the same degree is good, but on another level, it says that it's bad. But I go by the rule of thumb, like when it comes to eclipses, when they are aligned, I don't necessarily work with eclipses, and for good reason, because culturally and historically, they just don't go well together. Now,
Yeah, normally eclipses, and this is something that I try to tell people, that people, a large portion of a lot of people out there, they think of the moon as just PowerPoints, right? Like, oh, this is a super blood moon. This is a super moon. It's going to be a blood moon. It's going to be an eclipse. But PowerPoints are not necessarily good. If you want to go by traditional astrology, there is much more to it than that. Just like you're much more than your sun sign. You know, I'm a Capricorn. Well, what's your moon and what's your ascendant and everything else? You know, there's much more to it than that. So we need to look beyond just, oh, the moon is a super moon, it's a super blood moon, it's a super, wolf moon, whatever. It's really close to the earth. There's an eclipse. Usually eclipses are seen as bad in traditional astrological magic. There are cases where they're good. For example, part of the Picatrix says that you can do shit with eclipses, but usually eclipses are seen as a bad thing, okay? Because you have combustion. When the sun and moon are totally aligned, this creates a condition known as combustion. It's when the sun nullifies anything it comes in direct contact with because it's so powerful. So combustion. So a solar eclipse is generally seen as a bad time for magic. And then the opposite, a lunar eclipse, the sun and moon are in opposition. And opposition is the harshest. It is the worst of aspects. It is when planets are on totally opposite sides from each other. They're opposed. So me personally, when I see an eclipse, I avoid it like the plague. I will do nothing during an eclipse. Now, at this point, I want to repeat what I said when I opened up this episode. What is the first thing I said? The first thing I said on this video is I'm not saying any other system is wrong. I'm not saying that other paths are wrong. There are different approaches. But we are specifically talking about traditional astrological magic as we see in the Picatrix, Agrippa, the classical text. So we're not saying that you're wrong because you do stuff on eclipses, but we're talking about traditional astrology. In traditional astrology, eclipses are usually seen as a very bad time for magic.
Yes, so we have to talk about a couple other things here. The interaction with the other planets. You have your malefic planets and your benefic planets. Your benefic planets, and I'm going to include the head of the dragon and tail of the dragon here. The head of the dragon, Jupiter, and Venus are considered benefic. And then you have the malefic, which are Saturn, Mars, and the tail of the dragon, or Cauda Draconis. So the thing is, and also I want to include Algol in there, which is 26 degrees in Taurus. And that's for a whole other story. But you want to make sure that you avoid the malefics for the most part if you're going to do a working for self or working for gain. Now, another thing to avoid is the moon being opposed. Like, imagine a circle, the sun and a moon directly across from each other, like you cut a pie in half. You don't want that opposition. A couple other things to look out for, which are really important. Once again, we avoid Saturn in a aspect because Saturn slows down the ritual. Saturn slows down the spell. And most of the time, especially in a very impatient world we live in today, that's probably not something that you would like. So just bear that in mind. And once again, with the moon, look for the midheaven and also which is the 10th house, and also look for the 4th house for the most part.
Yeah, and I like to use the analogy of floods and hurricanes. Like, here's the thing: we're not, today the medieval and Renaissance concept of, really before that, it goes all the way back to Tetrabiblos of Ptolemy in late antiquity. This very, very, very ancient concept of malefics and benefics is not very popular today because people are like, well, I don't think anything could be bad. Well, here's the way that I explain this. We're not saying that Mars and Saturn are bad. In fact, they're very good for a lot of things. A lot of times we want to work with Mars for, protection, strength, defense against enemies, all these things. A lot of times we want to work with Saturn for, for lots of things: contemplation, philosophy, fertility. But here's the thing: we're not saying that these forces are bad in themselves, but Mars is very aggressive and volatile. And over time, people have found that when Mars makes a harsh aspect, such as opposition or square, that it can cause aggression and conflict in what you're trying to achieve. So you may get that job promotion, or you may get that new love, but there may be some war in there, some warfare that you have to go through to get it. And normally we're looking for the easy peasy approach. We want things to be peaceful when we get things, okay? We don't want to enter a battle to get that promotion, okay? So if you do a promotion spell with Mars making a harsh square or opposition aspect, you may notice some conflict. And the thing about Saturn is it tends to slow things down. So it's not saying they're bad. Like I said, I explain it like floods. Floods are not bad in themselves, and neither are earthquakes. These things are part of nature. Nature itself is not bad or good. Nature is just itself, okay? But it doesn't mean that you want a flood in your house. So there are different schools of, okay, first of all, if we're not working with lunar mansions, we want to try to get the moon in Cancer or Taurus, ideally, or Virgo, okay? That's the essential dignity aspect, or part of it, I mean. The next thing to consider is aspects. Aspects are relationships which have to do with arcs of degrees from other planets. So if the moon is 90 degrees and there is an orb and moiety there, but roughly around 90 degrees from a planet, then the moon is square aspect to that planet. They're 90 degrees apart. And this causes conflict between those planets. Opposition, the moon is 180 degrees. In other words, it's the opposite side of the circle from a planet. The moon is opposed. Again, this is a sign of conflict between the planets. So aspects are relationships. Planets are either friendly or harsh with each other. And opposition is like the greatest conflict. Square, the planets are kind of opposed, okay? Now, the friendly aspects are trine and sextile, and this is when planets are basically helping each other out, okay? So when the moon is sextile or trine, then this is a friendly aspect. So normally, there are two different ways of looking at this. Some would say that you avoid aspects with Saturn and Mars altogether. But some would say that friendly aspects are okay. Honestly, I think it's better to be safe. But many people, many traditional astrological magicians, they say that sextile and trine aspects to Mars and Saturn are fine. Because, yeah, they're there, but they're friendly. But you definitely want to avoid square and opposition aspects to Saturn. Now, if you have an astrological app, you can see aspects usually on an astrological chart or app. There are colored lines between planets. So you'll see like a red line or a blue line or whatever. So you can see this on astrological chart. Basically, sextile and trine are friendly aspects, and square and opposition are harsh aspects. They're when planets come into conflict with one another in traditional astrology. And another thing is, you want to avoid getting the malefic Saturn or Mars on the ascendant or midheaven. And it's good if you can get, according to the Picatrix, if you can get Venus or Jupiter, which are the fortunes, on the ascendant or midheaven. So if you can get either Jupiter or Venus, either on the ascendant rising up or directly above in the midheaven, more or less directly above, then this will add good luck and fertility to whatever you're trying to achieve. Now, here's the important thing. If you're trying to curse and destroy someone and you're trying to do like really destructive stuff, then you want the malefics. You want opposition and square because you're trying to bring in conflict and turmoil. Okay? But ethics are really important in my practice, and I try not to, teach people how to do that. But it's an important thing to consider. We don't avoid malefics and all these things and harsh aspects if we're trying to destroy. So in other words, if you're trying to do destructive magic to curse someone, you're going to want to use the waning moon while the moon is in Capricorn or Scorpio, because that's its detriment and fall. And while the moon is making an opposite or square aspect to Saturn or Mars, and you want Saturn or Mars on the ascendant or midheaven. That's if you want to destroy something, right? But normally, hopefully, we're not abusing our magic to hurt people, because that's unethical. Under most circumstances, that is, it's unethical. Normally, if you're trying to create good, positive things and fertility and growth and all this, in that case, you want the moon in Cancer or Taurus or Virgo, and you want it to make trine or sextile aspects to Venus and Jupiter. Try to get Venus and Jupiter on the ascendant and midheaven, and try to avoid, its detriment and fall. But, and then there's planetary hours. Planetary hours are usually seen as more essential than days. So, hour of the moon, throw that in there. This video is all over the place. What was that you said last time? If this sounds complex, well,
if it sounds complex, it is because it's very complex, especially once you get into the deeper astrology. Now, I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you get asked when we talk about planetary magic. Well, how many talismans will I make a year? To be honest, probably only a handful, because it takes a lot of patience to do this. And this is why I have a notebook. This is why I look for certain days, and I look for the aspects of where Jupiter is going to be. This was 2018 was actually a really good year for Jupiter at the end of 2019 as well, because it was in Capricorn for the most part. And what's interesting here is, once again, you're probably
not Capricorn, because Capricorn is its fall. You mean Sagittarius?
Yeah, I mean, when this was a good time to work with Jupiter, though.
You mean Sagittarius? I'm sorry, man. I'm just because I know that we're not going to edit. It's just a slip up. You mean Jupiter is in Sagittarius, which is really good.
Yeah, Sagittarius. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, but what's interesting here is that I made mine on the 26th, but you're probably only going to make a handful of these of these talismans, of these images, as they would say. Just
this
a small
is why
here.
Yeah, this is why I think lunar mansions are really good, because if you're impatient or you have an emergency, the lunar mansions, the moon goes through the zodiac so quickly. And this is why lunar mansions are so important. To work with Jupiter moves so slowly, or to work with Saturn or whatever, these planets move so slowly, you have to wait a long time But the lunar mansions, the moon goes through all 28 mansions in a month. So, if you're not seeing, if you want to do a love ritual and Venus is just not doing it for you, try to get the moon in the fifth mansion. Or if you're trying to whatever, the lunar mansions, that is a complete system of magic. And again, I highly recommend Christopher Warnock's Mansions of the Moon book. It's very good. And this is not a sponsorship. We're just offering because it's such good information. Christopher Warnock's Mansions of the Moon. The moon moves quickly through the mansions. So if you need something quick, and here's the thing, you're not always going to get perfect conditions. Sometimes you just have to do a ritual and see what happens because, you can't wait. But what I do is I take a notebook, and you mentioned a notebook, and I will look through the astrological conditions throughout the year on my app, on my phone, and I will look for, like I saw that in August. I saw that the sun, I forgot what it is. I was looking at when's a good time for an astrological talisman for the sun. Right now, the sun is in Aries, which is its exaltation, but it's aspecting Jupiter retrograde. So this is a really bad time for a solar talisman. Bad time for a Jupiter talisman, even though Jupiter's in Sagittarius. So I was looking through, well, what about when the sun is in Leo? And it was also, I think it was combust or something for a while. Or I forgot, man.
Yeah.
The sun doesn't get combust. I forgot what it was. It was some kind of messed up aspect. But basically, I narrowed it down to August. It was August something, a Sunday at sunrise. And then I found another talisman of Jupiter, like I forgot when it was, but it was like later on during the year, like in June or something. Jupiter will be in the mid-heaven at sunrise on Thursday. So the hour and day of Jupiter with Jupiter in the midheaven, and like everything was perfect, but I've got to wait some time. So like I get a notebook and I look at the planets and I mess with the app, the astrological software, and I look for timing and I plan ahead. So this is not the type of magic that you're going to want to do if you just have a quick emergency. There are other things you can do. But astrological magic using correct timing is very powerful. It's very scientific, but that is the one drawback is it takes time. But at least with the lunar mansions,
it's not something
it's quicker.
you on the cuff.
Yeah. So at least lunar mansions are quicker. So
and also the hardest part of this magic, and I think you would agree, is a preparation. That's it. Is just getting everything ready. And you have plenty of time.
That is everything, man. The ritual lasts like, I don't know, an hour tops, right?
Yeah, even less than that because of the planetary hours.
Yeah, the preparation though takes it takes more time. It's the actual ritual isn't that much. But I think that we've pretty much covered it all. I think we ought to give a couple of practical.
One thing I do want to cover here.
I think I want to give a couple of practical examples though before we close.
Yeah. Before we do that, I want to cover one more thing, is the cost. Now, a lot of people say that this kind of magic is expensive. Actually, most of it isn't. Yeah, you're going to run into the occasional herb that's illegal or something that's extinct on the occasion, but that's a really rare case. Now, you will find when you go through these books, like the eyes of a bull or the head of a frog, and you grind it in with dove's blood and you make it into a paste and then you burn it and you have your incense. Okay, we understand.
We're not encouraging that, by the way. We're not saying
to do it.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that there are sympathetic properties here, and to make a long story short, most of this stuff isn't expensive. And Agrippa, he actually, even though he can get a little more into the animal parts, you have to remember, the people who wrote these books, they were used to that. They were farmers. If you talk to a farmer today who's into raising cows and goats and stuff, you're going to find this isn't weird for them. I actually have a friend who's a farmer, and he has no problem with getting lambskin. almost no problem at all. While we've become more suburban, things have changed in that regard. So I do want to say
Yeah.
that most of this stuff isn't expensive. And even if it is a little expensive, you have months and months and months, sometimes years, to plan for a talisman.
Yeah, I'm vegetarian. I try to like do the whole ethical thing with animals, but I have to understand when these texts were written, and I'm not going to judge anyone else on how they do their magic. That's their path. But I personally, I try to avoid the animal stuff, but whatever. But like, dude, people are always saying, I'm glad you brought this up. They're like, this type of magic's expensive, and no, it's not. Now, look, okay, you can get sterling silver, which is usable. It's 92.5% silver. It's like 92.5% silver. And usually it's like 7.5% something else like copper, whatever. But it's 92% silver. You can get a thick sheet of this. You can make a talisman for $10 or $8 on eBay. I have bought so much sheet metal on eBay. I bought 10, and it's not like foil. Like, it's thick enough. It's like a plate. If you get it thick enough, it's like a plate that you can engrave. It's not like foil or anything, but you can get like sheets of 10. I've done it. It was like the 10 was more, it was like, I forgot how much it was. I got like this big thing of it. It was like $20 for shipping and everything. You can get you can even get gold flakes or whatever. You can make gold ink from gum arabic and alcohol and all that stuff with the gold flakes. You can do all this stuff. But sterling silver is the metal of the moon. Go on eBay, type in sterling silver plate or sterling silver sheet. Look it up, see what I'm talking about. Go to eBay, look up sterling silver sheet. For like $10, you can get a metal thing that you can make a lunar talisman. Okay, if you don't want to use the metal, you can buy the stones on eBay really cheaply. It's really easy to get these things online. It's not expensive. It's not hard. You just have to look. So yeah, let's give a couple of examples here. Let's say we're not doing lunar mansions. We're not doing lunar mansions. Let's say I want to do. Let's say that I want to interact with the lunar spirit. Okay. So what do? It would be good if I can do Monday, but really the planetary hour is more essential. If I can get the moon in Cancer or Taurus or Virgo, it's triplicity. That would be great. The moon in Cancer, the moon in Taurus. And if I can find a time, it would be perfect if I can get the moon directly above or somewhat directly above my head in the 10th house. So if I can do the hour of the moon any day of the week, it'd be Thursday, Friday, Saturday. If I can get a waxing moon in the 10th house during the hour of the moon, and basically at least free of opposition and square aspects to Saturn and Mars, then I'm good. I mean, yeah, that's basically it. Get the moon in Cancer or Taurus, waxing in the 10th house, and free of any harsh aspects to the infortunes in the hour of the moon. That is perfect. Okay? And basically get lunar things. I'll have a white altar cloth because white is associated with the moon. I'll burn aloes wood, which again is not aloe vera, it's acar wood, okay, or lignum aloes, and burn that incense. And I'll have my circle, which circles in traditional classical magic are not energy. You're not just pushing a circle and visualizing white light around you. It is marked on the ground if you want to follow the classical approach. And basically face the moon, burn my incense, and have my sigil. It could be full, the Olympic spirit, or pull, however you want to say that. It could be the Archangel Gabriel. And normally Normally, a perfectly clear scrying crystal is used. This is the most common way of doing scrying. You see it in Sibley's Clavis to the Keys of Solomon. You see it in different
And you
places.
keep it out of the circle.
Yeah, keep it out of the circle, unless you have a table of practice with a locus spiritui where you can like keep the spirit from getting out, because sometimes spirits will come through the scrying crystal towards you. So I'm glad you said that, outside the circle. But normally a clear glass crystal ball. But for the moon, I might try to get a white stone like selenite or something, that is basically it's perfectly white, because that's a lunar. Normally I want it clear, not cloudy. But for this, I might use that, because that's a lunar stone. I was working with Saturn the other day, and I got an image in my mind that I needed to get a black stone. So you can do that. And then you might anoint the scrying crystal with a lunar oil. Okay. Maybe some rosemary oil or something like that. And so you're using the occult properties associated with the moon, the colors, the incense, the herbal oils or essences, the stones, crystals. Probably use a white robe and face the moon and do my conjurations, calling the spirit while burning the incense with a circle, because I'm not calling spirits without a protective circle marked on the ground. So yeah, the names of God in there. Um, if you wanted to go even deeper, I normally use a Key of Solomon circle of consecrations as my general circle with the names Adonai, Elohi, all that stuff, Aglah, Yod He Vav He. But you could use the divine names associated with the moon. You could use, you can use Shaddai El Hai, and then put the names of the angel or whatever in the circle, like you see in the drawing spirits into crystals by Tritemius. So basically, you're using the correspondences to create a fit receptacle or vessel to attract, to draw down the powers of the moon at the proper timing. And what am I interacting with? I'm interacting with deities, if you're pagan, like Artemis, or I'm dealing with archangels from a Judeo-Christian background, Jibriel from an Islamic background. Basically, the moon is a gateway for interacting with spirits. So again, hour of the moon, moon in Cancer, Taurus, moon in 10th house, free of harsh aspects to the infortunes. I have my lunar stuff. I use it to construct a ritual. Conjurations, the two most important ingredients are incantation, which are spoken conjurations, herbal, spoken formulas or conjurations, and suffumigations. So that's the thing you see in the Picatrix, you see it in Agrippa, you see it in the Key of Solomon. Burning incense and calling vocally with your, word of mouth. So conjuration being a spoken call with the incense. And the incense smoke really imbues the atmosphere with the correspondence of the moon. So that is my practical example. Do you have a practical example you want to share maybe before we close?
Well, I think that's a pretty good example. I won't elaborate on it, but there is a good book out there I will recommend. It's in the fourth book of occult philosophy, and it is called Concerning Ceremonial Magic. It gives a perfect outline to ceremonial magic, or what's at least termed ceremonial magic. It's actually very much astrological, planetary, and it gives a very good illustration on how to do this. But if I had to say anything, I would make it more. Let's say it's a talismanic, the same astrological conditions. I think one of the most important things to do is a lot of times the magician would wear perfumes, and he would also, because that would attract the lunary spirits as well. Once again, you would have your circle there, and I would have a very similar setup. That's the classical a late 16th century paradigm. Uh, but one thing, let's say you want to make a talisman. One of the most important things, and it's heavily emphasized in Epicatrix, is this called besmoking or fumigating, and that's the difference. Is rather than using a crystal, um, you would get a sensor, you would get the aloe wood, and you would burn the aloe wood with this incantation, and you would generally put the spirit into that talisman or into that image or that seal while doing this incantation, and that puts the spirit of that hour. So I would like to say, but that's about the only difference, though. I mean, it's about the same process.
Oh, I want
But
to say one thing here. Is you see this in some texts, like the Rabbi Solomon on making the magical rings. If you don't want to leave the circle, if you want a spirit to touch the object, but you don't want to leave the circle, you could use a wand or a rod of a lunary wood would be even more perfect. Basically, you can, if the talisman's on a chain, you can put it on the rod. I wouldn't really put it on a sword because that could be perceived as like a threatening type of thing. I would not use a sword, but
yeah, that would be
a wand,
counterproductive.
yeah, I would not do a sword because it's like threatening. It could be perceived that way by a spirit. So a rod or a staff or a wand, you can extend it out through the circle boundary and over the incense smoke. And again, the circle in classical magic was not an energy field like in Wicca. And you didn't visualize a circle of light around you. This is a totally different paradigm. So before people get into classical magic, it's important to understand the classical approach. There's no problem extending something over the boundary because this is not an energy field. It is a divine names written in a circle around you is the classical approach. The circle is something marked on the ground. So you can extend something over the boundary. So a lot of people in Wicca and modern neo-paganism, and also in some of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Thelemic traditions, they have this idea that if you go over a boundary, you break the circle. But this is a different paradigm. The circle is marked on the ground. So you can take a wand or rod, and if the necklace has a chain, and you can extend it over the incense smoke outside the boundary, and the spirits can touch it and imbue it with power without you yourself leaving the circle. So, anyways,
Yeah, so I do want to leave on this one note since I know it's about time to wrap up. That when you're doing this, you're taking the energy from the cosmos that God sent within the stars, and it's kind of like trapping the spirit of the event to have with you forever. For example, my moon is in Capricorn, which is a big issue. So, one thing that I have to actually work on is a moon talisman, and that's really important. And you can actually use,
oh, dude, we've got to
yeah,
bring. I'm so glad that you said this. I wish we had said it earlier. You need to look at your natal chart. Yeah, that's really, if planets are afflicted, then that could be, it can cause some backlash when you're doing talismanic magic and stuff. So, yeah.
yeah, that's for a whole other video. But I think it's really important. I think that if I remember right, is it your Saturn or Jupiter that's combust? I forget.
My Jupiter is combust and my moon is conjunct Saturn.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because the first, and this is a totally separate video, and I think we'll make it together at some point on how to fix your birth chart. Like I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I mix up things sometimes. So you have to pardon that earlier hiccup because sometimes I mix up Saturn and Jupiter. Like my mind flip-flops things.
Oh, you were saying Saturn and Capricorn. See, you were saying
Yeah, and
Saturn and
yeah,
Capricorn is what you're
yeah, and
trying to
Jupiter
say.
came out. Yeah.
Since my Jupiter is combust, I've found, and it explains a lot because I found when I try to do Jupiter talismans, sometimes there can be some backfiring. And I was like, why, when I do these Jupiter rituals, do I get like some backlash like every time? And then when I started really getting into the astrology, This goes into not really transits, because that's aspects with your natal chart, but not really but basically when planets are afflicted, this can cause a little bit of backlash. They're like psychic hiccups, okay? It's not saying your rituals won't work, but you might notice a little bit of backfire when you try to work with planets that are afflicted in your natal chart. And even Agrippa says that working with planets that are really dignified or strong in your chart, you'll get really powerful results. So if you have something that's really, really dignified and strong in your natal chart, then you'll get really good results from it. So, but anyways, I guess that's it. And that is our joint lesson. I am Taliesin McKnight, and I'm joined with Theophilos Peleus, also called the Logos of Ophiel. That is his YouTube channel, is Logos of Ophiel. He is an ordained priest, and he really knows his stuff. So if you're on my channel, I really recommend that you subscribe to the Logos of Ophiel. He has a really great content. And yeah, man, that's basically it. Thank you very much. And this is part of a series
coming too. We also have 6 other planets coming along too. And just
that's what I was about to say. This is a part of a series. We're going to go through all 7 planets, and this is the very first part of the series. This is on moon magic from a classical magical standpoint. There's very little information on classical magic. There's lots of stuff on Wicca, neo-paganism, Victorian Lodge magic like Thelema, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, OTO, Chaos magic, Illuminatis of Thanateros. But there's very little on classical magic. So that's what we're trying to do. So that is moon magic, first part of a 7-part series on the planets, planetary magic from a classical magic standpoint. So,
and also bear in mind, we've got a lot of nitty gritty out of the way here when it comes to the astrological theory about the ascendant and the midheaven. Luckily, we put it in here so we don't have to always repeat that. So that's why this is a little bit longer. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. And I hope everyone has a great day. Have a great day, y'all. Everyone have a great day, and God bless.